to this opening of the exhibition on the Chinese landscape painting Early Spring by the renowned painter Guo Qi. Thank you for coming to this first-time event. My name is Joan Del Plato, and I am a professor of art history here at Simon's Rock. The audience today includes students from several sections of the required course for all first-year students, Seminar 1, in which this Chinese landscape painting is one of the 4 cultural texts all students learn to read. I'm also a teacher of Sem 1, and this is the first time the course has included an Asian text. I'm very happy about the expansion of the required curriculum. Before I introduce the student curators, I want to mention that we'll be here in the McConnell for about 45 minutes. At the end of the co-curator's illustrated talk, there will be brief comments by 2 of Simon's Rock's Chinese culture scholars, Professor of Music and Cultural Studies and Electronic Arts John Myers, and Professor of Geography and Asian Studies Chris Coggins. After the program, we invite you to see the facsimile reproduction up close and the details accompanying it, along with the quotations by the artists that have been selected by the co-curators. Meriwether and Chartwells have provided green tea and some intriguing Chinese-style snacks, which we invite you to sample. The subtitle of the show is A Student Exhibition on a Chinese Landscape Painting. I would like to introduce the co-curators who are also subject tutors for this semester's 2 sections of Global Art, Middle East, and Asia. Abby Donnelly came to Simon's Rock from Southern California. She is a junior concentrating in art history and anthropology. She is a cross-country and track runner. Delaney Graham is a sophomore who is also moderating into art history. Her second concentration is computer science. Like Abby, Delaney runs fast, but her running takes place on tennis and badminton courts. Let me turn the program over to their very capable hands.
So hello, I'm Delaney.
And I'm Abby.
And so we're going to be going over Guo Qi's Early Spring today, which is from 1072 CE. And first, we're just going to talk about the subject of this piece. We're going to go over the elements of nature in it and the elements of people, just identifying some key features. So right here, we have the piece, Early Spring, on the right. And we've pulled some details, one of which is a pine tree and one of which is a sweeping hill scene. So I pulled these 2 details because they're very different. The first is a pine tree, which is very kind of chaotic in its form. It's very poignant and has a lot of sharp detail, which is highlighted with the dark pigment. And with the second image, we have the hill scene, which is much softer. What is done with diluted ink, which creates the gradient gray effect. So when you look at the 2 of these, you really see a sense of variation that's in this piece. And together, all these elements make this mountain scene, which is really about the sense of harmony that's in nature.
So there are a lot of conflicting scholarly opinions regarding the subject due to the complexity of the details. And Taoism is heavily reflected throughout the piece due to the harmony of the nature and humans alike.
So our next slide. This is, again, highlighting some details from the piece, but rather than nature, these 2 details show humans and signs of civilization.
Right, so in the top left-hand picture, you can see 2 women and children, as well as a dog, and they are disembarking from their boat. And in the bottom left-hand picture, you can see several buildings. It's debated what these buildings are supposed to be, but some of the options are temples, educational facilities, or possibly some sort of spiritual retreat.
So again, with this combination of nature, with these small details that show humanity within it, you get a real sense of the harmony between the 2 as not to separate man from nature. It's about the harmony between them and about us being within it. So now we're going to talk about the composition of this piece and the visual language throughout it. Just going to analyze the meaning form, especially using Guoqi's quotes from his writing on landscape painting. So first we have a quote that was pulled from Wen Xifeng's essay of Nature and Art, Monumental Landscape. And this quote is, "Landscape painting is expressed through a profound belief in communication with nature, a cosmic vision of man's harmonious existence in a vast but orderly universe." And we thought that this quote really just fit in with the mentality that Guoqi and other painters like him would have had when approaching this piece, in that it was about showing nature as a harmonious thing that existed with man, and that was very important to them.
So these are the 3 levels of composition as written by Guoqi in his essay on landscape painting. The levels are high, deep, and level, and they each refer to specific segments on the painting. So high is the very top of the painting, deep is the middle, and level is the bottom of the painting itself.
And these 3 areas are not only a visual reference to the dimension of the piece, but they also have a more metaphorical meaning. The first being high, which is a reference to the heavenly area. It's very mystical up there. There's a lot of fading in the mountains, which is both visual and metaphorical. Deep is a secondary level, which kind of alludes to the deepness of nature. As you can see, like the farther back trees, the farther back rocks. It's a reference to that. And the level is what's close to the viewer. It's the rocks and the trees that are up towards the front, and they kind of put the viewer in the scene.
So the really interesting thing about this composition and the composition of many landscape paintings like it are that the composition itself suggests both natural and social hierarchy. So you can see even with where the people are placed within the painting, the people of sort of working or lower classes are found at the very bottom of the painting, while the structures that are meant to represent some sort of spiritual retreat or education are found in the middle of the painting. And at the very top, you won't see any humans at all, because there's sort of the notion that the mountains are too sort of majestic and spiritual for humanity. So next we have the history and context of the piece. We'll be discussing the Northern Song Dynasty and Taoism.
So the first thing I'm going to show you for this part is a video from the British Museum, which gives a great example of how a traditional scroll such as this would have been hung. It's a very laborious process that probably would have been a lot harder in 1072 than in this video, but it gives you a good idea. So if we can cue the video.
Absolutely delighted to have both of these new works, which you have so generously donated to the museum recently. They're completely different as works of art, and I know that they have different messages. And I wonder if you could say something about your intention when you were making these.
Chinese history and culture is a very, very, very long story. It's not difficult to talk, and it's okay to write, but to paint is a challenge. Yeah, because it's a visual image. Now we're back to painting. Painting, I think, always 2 things is what to paint and how to paint it. Which means concept part, and technique part. So these 2 parts, I think we need both. We cannot without any other. So for this one, this particular picture is one of my project. I called it empire, or thousands of years of empire, through which I look back, thinking, analyzing, understanding Chinese culture and history.
With these 2 paintings in particular, when they were brought to us, they were sheets of Schwen paper, heavily loaded with ink, and they were it's a very thin paper, very delicate. And they were just in paper rolls. First we documented and assessed them. Russia tested the ink to check whether it would be safe to use a wet lining technique. And in this case, it was. The ink was stable, so what that meant Chulasha could apply a lining using a thin wheat starch paste. That's the adhesive we use here in the Hirayama studio. And what she did is she brushed the back of the painting using, it's called a peibi brush, a sheet that's sort of made of long sheep or goat hairs, and applying that paste to the back of the painting very evenly. And then once that paste layer is on there, Chulasha applied another layer of Schwen paper, and that ensures that the painting becomes flat and strong and stable, so it has this lining behind it. After the painting is sort of prepared with that first lining, Chulasha was able to make the design for the mount. So that involves choosing what's the right colour to complement this painting and what's the right size to create the right aesthetic. So Chulasha made the design, and after that she could prepare the lining silks, which these silks from China, they're very fine, and they need to be prepared by wetting them and straightening them out exactly onto the red lacquer table that we use, straightening it out really flat. The weave's got to be exactly straight, the silk has all got to be lined up exactly straight, and then Chulasha applied quite a thicker paste, and that again is wheat starch paste, and brushing that in and making it so even. The paste has got to be distributed really evenly across the whole expanse of the silk, and then again lining that with a layer of Schwen paper placed on top, and brushing that down. Chulasha for this uses the Wutso brush. It's made of palm fibre, and it's quite sort of a strong hard brush, but together with the softness of the Schwen paper, it makes a really great bond, firm bond. Then after that, it's the very, very delicate process of cutting and joining the different parts together. So that's ensuring that every edge is really straight, and then joining them together. So that means creating this sort of window mount around the painting, and they are adhered again with a sort of a thick paste line. When you notice a scroll when it's finished, it has a protective silk wrapper around the top. And Chulasha creates this by adhering what we call a cover silk, and this is pasted onto the top of the mount, so that it means that when it becomes a scroll and it's rolled up, it has this extra protective layer of silk at the top, and it can be handled and stored in this way. And then the whole mount can be humidified and relaxed, and the painting is relaxed, and then the backing papers can be prepared. And then after this final backing paper is adhered, which is sort of unifies the whole back of the painting with the cover silk at the top, that can go on the drying board, where they will then dry and flatten. And these paintings were kept there for nearly 9 months, and they've experienced all the seasons. They've become really flat and strong and supple. 9 months later, Chulasha, using her bamboo spatula, inserts it around and releases the painting from the drying board, safely rolling it up along the wall, and then Chulasha burnishes the back of the painting. Now this she does using a smooth stone and a little bit of beeswax on the back of the painting. She has this burnishing motion which it compacts all the layers of the painting and gives the Schwen paper backing a really shiny, smooth finish. That means that when the painting is rolled, that soft, smooth backing comes up against the painting and there's no abrasion. It's a really sort of silky feel, and it softens the whole painting and makes it really supple and easy to roll. After this burnishing, the paper edges that we used to attach it to the drying board can be trimmed off, and then the top stave and bottom roller can be attached. So this is where Chulasha has to show off her carpentry skills, even some metalwork skills, because the top stave needs to be sawn to be the perfect size, the edges need to be covered, copper eyelets, which Chulasha made herself from copper wiring, are inserted to make the sort of the hanging loops through which the hanging braid will go. And again the bottom roller as well, which is a lovely cedarwood roller with what we call juto, or roller knobs on the edge. These are made from mahogany, and Chulasha carves the edge of this wooden roller to attach the juto on perfectly. So it's a really multi-skilled operation. And then when that is all done, attaches the hanging braid and the tying ribbon.
Finished.
And there the hanging scroll is finished.
Looks great. Thank you. That's
Now
great.
you're welcome.
Wonderful.
It's
yeah.
my job.
You did a great job. 30% of painting, 70% of math. That says how important the math is.
Artist and the calligraphy is the same, and the math is always very, very good friend because they are draw painting and writing calligraphy very finished before July, and the paper is lots crease looking is terrible, not very well. After month, very flat painting, everything is go out. Looking is so good, and math and artist calligraphy always very good friend.
Because the paper is very, very, very thin, and after paint is very, very wobbly, and have to properly stretch it back, and it looks great. All the subtleties of the ink work, the whole scroll, the form is a traditional Chinese, but the subject and the way of painting is very modern. How to merge it in the right way.
Okay, so as you can see, scroll hanging is very difficult, takes a very long time. During the Northern Song Dynasty, there were a lot of advancements made to the techniques of landscape painting, as well as portrait painting. However, Guoxi only ever did landscape painting, which was unique for court painters during this time period. He himself had a lot of contributions to these advancements, such as new techniques in brushworks, the creation of new inks, as well as developments of new techniques in perspective. And inks are also a very important part of landscape painting during this time because ink itself is actually sort of a representation or suggestion of Taoist principles due to its fluidity and its variance in its usage, in that it can be more saturated or less saturated in certain locations depending on what it's depicting.
Now, the guy here on the left is the emperor that Guoqi would have presumably painted this piece for. He was a royal painter, so anytime that an emperor or someone in the royal court wanted a painting, he was the guy to go to. And this would have happened during the Northern Song Dynasty, which, as you can see on the map, is in eastern China. So, now we'd like to call upon John Myers and Chris Coggins to give us their input on this subject.
Okay, so maybe I'll try to work without the mic. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good. So I'll talk a little bit about Taoism and give you a couple of readings, and I suspect you'll be doing some reading from the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi, which are classic texts associated with Taoist philosophy. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the principles of Taoist philosophy. And before we do that, I would just point out that Taoism has ancient roots in China, roots in shamanism, in mysticism, in animism, in vitalism, the belief in life forces flowing through the landscape that connect our bodies to the more than human world. Sacred mountains. There are ancient cults associated with sacred mountains in northern China, the mountain range, the Qinling Range, just south of the cradle of Chinese civilization in the Wei River Valley, is a good example. And there's still Taoist sacred mountains in that range, such as Huashan. And so there were many ancient sects in that area, and also the development of yin-yang theory. The I Ching, the Book of Changes, is the most ancient classic text that we could associate with Taoism, and that is from the early Zhou dynasty, early in the first millennium BCE. So before these texts that you're more likely to read in this course, or at least to read excerpts of, such as the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi, there are already really well-established principles associated with what will become Taoism. So I'd like to just make a differentiation between Dao Jia, Taoist philosophy. These are distinctions that are made in China. So Dao Jia, Taoist philosophy, Dao Jiao, Taoist religion, folk religion, and Xian Dao, or Taoism associated with esoteric practices, magical practices, the quest for immortality. And these involve things like Huaidan, or external alchemy, the ingestion of herbs and animal parts and minerals and things that will give a person great longevity or immortality if practiced right. And that is the origin of Chinese medicine. And then Neidan, internal alchemy, meditation, Qigong, body practices involving yogic techniques and other techniques that are meant to cultivate qi, or vital energy within the body. And, acupuncture is an example, but also things like Qigong and Tai Chi Chuan are examples of the kind of development of Neidan, or internal alchemy. So, even Dao Jia, even philosophical Taoism, is in some ways not only a philosophy, because it deals with matters of ultimate cosmological concern that take on a very religious kind of valence. And so I just want to quickly read the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching, the book that can be translated, the title can be translated as The Way, the Tao as the way, and De, power, and Jing, classic, so the way of power, the classic of the way and its power. And this is a translation you may have seen by Jane English and Jia Feng. I also highly recommend the Chinese Text Project translation, which is online. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Ever desireless, one can see the mystery. Ever desiring, one can see the manifestations. These two spring from the same source, but differ in name. This appears as darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gate to all mystery. So that is the first of 81 chapters. I hope you'll dig in and read a lot of this as you study this painting and how it relates to Taoism. A few things to think about. The named versus the nameless in this first chapter. There's a sense of epistemological relativism here. Words and knowledge, words as vehicles for knowledge or representation of meaning, are necessary for a substantial part of human communication, but they are entirely insufficient for the apprehension of ultimate reality. So words can only serve as guides. Language must not be mistaken for the phenomena or noumena, if you will, the deeper underlying sort of wellspring of the real world it represents. So language cannot be mistaken. The representation should never be mistaken for the phenomena or noumena that it represents. We must not reify concepts, but try to remain responsive to the forces and powers that comprise the world that we are inextricably embedded in, involved in, and that we really are. That is the nature of our being. So the Tao, or the real, is always beyond the boundaries of words and the name. It's always mysterious. It always has an indeterminate component, even though it manifests itself in natural patterns that are cyclical and that we should become more of a part, more a part of, more one with. The desiring and the desirelessness, this dichotomy, is not an ascetic philosophy of purification and transcendence, and I think that's really important. But it does become that in certain forms of esoteric Taoist practice, when people are trying to overcome their worldly mortality and become immortals. But in Taoist philosophy, it is not that. Imagine a soteriological or a philosophy of a type of salvation or a religion without a quest for purity or ultimate transcendence, and then you have Taoism. I hope that makes sense. In other words, being in this world is the ultimate. It need not and cannot be transcended. Being in it fully is a form of, in a sense, it's a form of immanence that is the ultimate kind of power. So there's no fear of death in the Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi. There's a sense that it is that being and non-being are equivalent, and we don't fully understand being. There's no reason to fear non-being, and that they are mutually constitutive in certain ways. The same source, but different names. Both desire and desirelessness spring from the same source, but they have different names. That's a complicated idea. That is the mystery of mysteries. So the question of human agency, what are we to do, is the mystery of mysteries. The great existential problem. You can think of Hamlet, should I do it? Should I take my own life? What is going to happen? As well as the mysteries of the questions that the French existentialists are asking about the nature of being, existence and essence. What does it mean to exist? We shouldn't claim an essence we don't understand. First we exist. Existence precedes essence. These are similar ideas, but for the Taoists, the fact that human agency needs to be given deep consideration and care at all times. We must live carefully. So our own agency becomes the existential question and the cosmological question. Our own will to power. How might we channel or live the will of nature, but toward small-scale, anarchic, sustainable societies? To say those small-scale, anarchic, sustainable sounds awfully, current or something like that. But I'm not kidding. If you read the Tao Te Ching, that's what it's saying. The perfect state, in the perfect state, you can hear the roosters crow in the neighboring state, and the dogs barking, but neither, I don't mess with them, they don't mess with us. We don't mess with them, they don't mess with us. Small scale, no need for a kind of power over and a severe form of hierarchy. So that, I hope, is a good thumbnail intro into the Tao Te Ching. And I think you could find the sensibilities in that painting of these themes of being in and with the cosmos, which in Chinese would be tian, which literally means sky, but it means the cosmos, and nature is a manifestation of the cosmos. The second one is brief, and you've probably heard this one. This comes from Zhuangzi. And this is when Zhuangzi, this is the famous butterfly quote. How many people have heard the butterfly quote? Oh, well then shoot. I will read it. It's very short. Once, Zhuangzhou dreamt he was a butterfly. This philosopher. Self-reference right there. Okay? And just to give you a hint, Zhuangzi is the first post-structuralist. I think that would be my argument. Zhuangzhou dreamt he was a butterfly flitting and fluttering around, happy with himself and doing as he pleased. He didn't know he was Zhuangzhou. He didn't know he was Zhuangzi. Suddenly he woke up and there he was, solid and unmistakable, Zhuangzhou. But he didn't know if he was Zhuangzhou who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was Zhuangzhou. Between Zhuangzhou and a butterfly there must be some distinction. This is called the transformation of things. So there you have it, probably the most famous little parable of the Zhuangzi, this great Taoist text. So there you have ontological relativism. The question, well, what are we? What is our consciousness? What's the nature and significance of human consciousness? Taoism throws that question at you and continues to do it through these texts. But by giving up or scaling back on our own kind of relentless sense of the importance of our own human agency, the human will to control, by pulling back, by scaling back on our own agendas, we can gain the agency and be part of the agenda of a much larger natural forces. That is, again, Tian of the cosmos that reproduce the world and are not destructive of the nature of our existence. That is why you see people who did Anthropocene studies a little bit, studying who we are, what we are today in the context of global warming, sometimes invoking classical philosophical Taoist philosophy, saying, what is human agency? What are the kinds of boundaries we might look to? And that's why basic principles of Taoist philosophy include Wu Wei, so-called non-action, but it isn't passivity. It is, Wu means emptiness or nothingness, and Wei is action. So being like water is a message we see. Be like water. Follow Tian, flow naturally, act without imposing, act in ways that align with Tian and with the cosmos. And that is actual power, that is enduring, okay? So I think that I will leave off there and just add that those Taoist sensibilities infuse Confucianism, which is odd because you think, well, Confucianism is hierarchical. Ultimately, it leads to very sexist, patriarchal institutions. But within Confucianism, the cosmology of statecraft is one in which the ruler is seen as responsible for the harmony between humans and nature in the terrestrial realm. So this painting beautifully shows this sense of Tianming, or the mandate of heaven, the cosmic harmony that can be achieved between humans, between anthropogenic impacts on the landscape and the landscape and nature itself, that this can be woven together more or less seamlessly. Ultimately, this painting is supposed to be proof that the emperor of the time, his policies are in that harmony. Therefore, also, you should know that as soon as there was disorder in nature, ranging from plagues of locusts to droughts to storms to tiger attacks, that was evidence that there was a disharmony created by the rulers and the ruling regime. Those rulers had to take that very seriously and offer prayers to Tian, to local city gods, etc., because that was extremely serious. So that's where you see Taoism influencing even Confucianism, which is often seen as humanistic and purely secular. It's not the case. So I'll just leave off there.
So just sharing a perspective from the arts, there are so many connections that we can make with this. Part of the idea of transcending language in a conventional sense, we often find that in all of the arts form, in all of the arts trying to go beyond words. And there are ways in which that attempt is kind of universal and can be found in all cultures. We find a way that the arts can make these connections for us and also to affirm our unity with nature. And I think that's also a very important thing if we're in the context of the seminar, if we are examining our relationship with nature. This presents a very strong, this painting and the philosophies behind it present a very strong affirmation of our unity with nature, of nature's presence within our own bodies, and not the idea of nature as something to be subjugated and controlled, but something to be honored and recognized. And so the musical piece that I selected is actually much more ancient than the painting. The piece of music is called Gaoshan Liushui, which is the high mountain and flowing water. And of course in the painting, we have the presence of water and mountains together. And that's very important because those things, if you read Guo Xi's essay on painting, he talks about the need for both elements and how they enrich each other. And that, of course, ties in with the yin-yang dualities that Chris just mentioned. The male and female presence, the male and female aspects of our own personalities and the male and female aspects of nature need to be present together and to work in harmony. And so that is a kind of non-hierarchical view of gender as well as a non-hierarchical view of nature, which is also present. And as Chris mentioned, the Confucian aspect might seem to reinforce the male dominance and the social hierarchy, but the deep level aspect of Taoism is much beyond that. And so in this painting, you can feel the presence of water, for instance. Water is so beautiful, we can see the presence of water in the techniques that are used to do these paintings, and the water is present in representation in the form of waterfalls and streams, and the idea is that the water is a living thing. We're reading that in Guo Xi's essay. The water is not just an object, but the water is the blood of the mountains, and it nourishes the trees, and it nourishes the other vegetation. So water is present, female principle, and then the rocks are like the bones of the mountain. So all of these images, which Guo Xi uses words for, are actually describing a process in which, in his paintings, the verbal duality is transcended through the act of painting, through the act of creating art. And of course, there's a unity with calligraphy, which we'll also look at together. The calligraphy and painting, as Guo Xi said, are together as activities, as artistic activities. And they utilize the same tools, the use of the brush, and the characters themselves, the hanzi or kanji, are also representational in their most basic form. So we're still coming back to a kind of concrete representation of nature, even in the written language. So in a way, that possibility of having a more transcendent approach to language is already embedded in the language itself. And the art of poetry, which includes calligraphy and brings that together, is also a way of sort of affirming the visual, artistic, expressive dimension of language to the foreground. So the music piece, Gaoshan Liu Shui, is very, as I said before, that goes back to at least the beginning of the Han Dynasty, probably a little earlier, so this would be around 2 centuries BCE. And we're not absolutely sure if the musical notes have been changed in some ways, but the composer of that piece is Boya, who played an ancient instrument called the guqin, which was also associated with Taoism and with Confucianism to some extent. The guqin is a very, very quiet instrument. So imagine if you can still hear me. Can you still hear me? As quiet as you can get. So here we are in our modern culture. We're surrounded by loudness. But this instrument was so quiet, you would only play for one other person, maybe your best friend. And in this case, Boya, with another Taoist who treasured his playing, instead of playing for large audiences, he just played for one other person who could appreciate his music. And then when that person died, he broke his instrument because it couldn't be appreciated anymore. So that's very, very different from what we think. I'm going to be a famous musician and thousands of people will cheer for me and when I give my concerts. But instead, I'm just playing for one person who really appreciates music and who understands the concepts behind it. So that piece, Gaoshan Liu Shui, is a kind of musical equivalent. It's actually played in this version on the guzheng, which is also a very ancient instrument, which it really excels at the depiction of water. So if you listen to that piece, you hear these beautiful arpeggios, the flowing water. And that's very deliberate because there's a tradition of representing nature in music within East Asian traditions. So I think that's, we have time for questions? If you'd like to. So yeah, we could have questions, comments.
That song will be playing outside in the student gallery while you walk through, and it should be playing for the rest of the semester.
Any other questions? If not, it might be smart to point out also that the Song Dynasty was a period of rapid technological development in China, with innovations in agriculture as well as art. And I appreciate that you pointed that out. Militarism. So the human impacts on the landscape were actually quite significant. It isn't as if China was magically free of environmental degradation. It actually is heavily in agricultural areas where there were intensive rice cropping and wheat production, especially, there was a lot of deforestation. So these things were, even though that it was doctrine that one was to harmonize with nature, we have a lot of evidence that it wasn't that easy, especially to support the burgeoning populations in the plains, especially in eastern China. I just want to point that out. There's a really good book on this called The Retreat of the Elephants by Mark Elvin. That's an environmental history of China. If you're interested in that, we have that in the library. He talks a lot about that kind of environmental degradation. Yeah.
Was it often that a leader was blamed for environmental difficulties? Were they blamed for that as well?
They certainly could be. If it led to flooding, if it led, especially to the destruction of the agricultural base, but if problems were large scale and caused some degree of social disruption, they certainly could be implicated, definitely.
Is there a significance behind why each element, like each articulation also includes the other, like the signal, yin yang symbol that is shown on the screen? Is there a significance behind why each element also includes the other?
Held in balance.
In itself?
Together.
Dynamically, you can picture this symbol actually becomes really important in the 13th century in Neo-Confucianism. And Confucianism at that point embraced a lot of Taoist and Buddhist principles. And you can visualize that as a sphere. And so the yin and yang are mutually constitutive, but they're also in dynamic harmony, so that the yin is becoming yang. It has a seed of yang in it. It's changing, and yang is becoming yin. And so all phenomena are in this kind of dynamic, mutually constitutive, and kind of mutually consuming relationship.
That's a
change, constant change.
Constant change, and that's an important thing to compare, for instance, with when we read Plato, Socrates talking about the dialectic, the identity of opposites, but because of the kind of static aspect of that, it doesn't have the same kind of dynamic quality that Chris is talking about. And also the idea of constant transformation present within our own bodies, the transition between an in and out breath, for instance. Where exactly does one stop and the other begin? We can feel that immediately. And that subtle transformation is something that the painters and the philosophers and musicians were all very interested in and tried to capture in their work.
And that very subtle transition between winter and very early spring is exactly what it is that's
being alluded to, that moment which is not quite winter, not quite spring, things have not quite come alive in the way we think of spring, but we're right on the cusp and we're somewhere in between them and it's in flux, right? That's, I think, at the center of the subject that's been selected, and we see that played out in formal terms as well.
Could I ask you to repeat the name of that instrument?
Go ahead. Guqin is the, and Guzheng, the one you're hearing in the sound in the lobby is Guzheng. So it's spelled Z-H-E-N-G. And then the original instrument played by Boya is Guqin, and that's spelled Q-I-N with pinyin romanization.
The chin has no bridges. The fretboard, the sound board is hollow, and it has mother of pearl inlays. If you touch and pluck at the same time, you get beautiful harmonics. So glissando and vibrato are really easy to perform on an instrument that, well, not easy, but easier because it doesn't have bridges.
Yeah, and so the zhang, that's the main difference. They're both zithers. The zhang is the same, basically, as the Japanese koto, which some of you have also seen, and that's louder, so it's a little bit easier to hear. Guqin is incredibly soft, incredibly quiet, so it's almost for an audience of one, or maybe two.
The student co-curators have included John's statement about what exactly the name of the instrument is, and you can find it on one of the placards in the exhibition. So feel free to take your time and take a look now carefully, or come back, or both. You might want to visit and revisit the exhibition that's here. This is probably a good time to